The room was sterile. White walls, white sheets, white noise humming through the machines beside me. I couldn't move much. My limbs felt like they belonged to someone else. I blinked slowly, dragging myself back into awareness, breath by shallow breath. Pain echoed in places I didn't know had nerves. The taste of metal lingered on my tongue, and the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old sorrow. He was there, my husband, sitting beside my bed like a man in mourning, except his eyes weren't filled with grief. They were sharp, cold, watching me like I was a burden he hadn't chosen. "You've always been weak," he said. No emotion, no hesitation, just that. At first, I thought I imagined it. Maybe it was a hallucination brought on by morphine or trauma. But he didn't move, didn't blink. His mouth tightened, as if he'd been waiting for the perfect moment to release that truth. And just like that, the pain inside me shifted. It stopped being physical. His words cut deeper than the needles in my veins. They echoed louder than the machines tracking my heartbeat. I wanted to scream, to cry, to ask him why, but my body was silent, frozen in weakness, the very weakness he accused me of. I turned my face away, not because I was ashamed. No, because I didn't want him to see what was growing behind my silence. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger comes when you have the energy to fight. What I felt was lower, darker, a seed, freshly planted in soil soaked with betrayal. He thought I couldn't hear, that I wouldn't remember, that I wouldn't recover, but I would. And when I did, he would learn exactly how strong I had become. I pretended to sleep as he stood and walked out of the room, his footsteps quiet, but the echo of his words louder than any slam of a door. "You've always been weak." That sentence circled my mind like a vulture, picking at memories I had tried to bury. But pain, especially emotional pain, has a cruel way of resurrecting the past. I remembered our early days, how his compliments always carried a shadow. "You're so sweet, too soft for this world," he'd say with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Back then, I thought it was romantic, protective. I didn't see it for what it was, a warning. There were the parties he convinced me to skip, saying I'd get anxious. The decisions he made for me, so I wouldn't have to stress. The way he'd tell our friends I was delicate, fragile, a little glass bird he had to handle carefully, and how I smiled through it, thinking that love meant surrender. I thought about the accident, how I ended up in this hospital bed. The details were hazy, but one thing was clear. He wasn't the one who saved me. He was the one watching me break, waiting for the right time to say I deserved it. I blinked slowly, pain crawling down my spine. Not just from injury, from knowing I'd let it happen for so long, from realizing I had handed over my strength piece by piece, mistaking manipulation for devotion. But that was over now. His words, spoken so casually, had done what no therapist, no friend, no whisper of doubt ever could. They woke me up, and now I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. I pretended to sleep as he stood and walked out of the room, his footsteps quiet but the echo of his words louder than any slam of a door. "You've always been weak." That sentence circled my mind like a vulture, tearing at the soft tissue of my past, exposing truths I'd hidden even from myself. I felt like I was bleeding on the inside, not from the accident, but from that one clean slice of truth he'd decided to offer when I was least able to defend myself. I laid still, eyes closed, body aching, but mind racing. The pain in my side, my ribs, the bandages wrapped around me, none of it compared to the pain of knowing he had been waiting for that moment, that I had spent years beside someone who had mistaken my love for submission, my silence for permission, my sacrifices for failure. He always masked it as care. That was his talent. He could break you gently, kill you slowly, with smiles and soft-spoken commands. "You don't need to go to that interview. I'll take care of everything. Why don't you stay home tonight? You look exhausted. Don't worry about making decisions. Rest. I'll handle it." At first, it felt like protection. Then it felt like being wrapped in cotton and left in a locked room with no door. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking, stopped pushing, stopped choosing, because choosing meant conflict. And conflict with him always ended the same way, with me apologizing for being too emotional, too impulsive, too me. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and betrayal. I shifted slightly, testing what parts of my body still worked. Legs, stiff but responsive. Arms, sore but intact. My face ached on the left side, likely bruised. But my mind had never been clearer. I remembered the night before the accident. We had argued, if you could even call it that. I had wanted to visit my sister. He said it was a waste of energy, that I was always tired, always overwhelmed, that it wasn't good for me to be out so often. I said I needed space. He laughed, said I couldn't handle being alone. Then I got in the car. Everything else after that was fragments. Headlights, rain, screeching tires, pain, darkness. And now, light, but not the peaceful, healing kind. A clinical light that revealed every inch of how broken I was, but also how intact my will still remained. His words were supposed to be the final blow. What he didn't know, what he never cared to know, was that inside this so-called weak woman, there had always been something dangerous, something he'd spent years trying to suppress. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. What I felt was quiet, cold, pure, the kind of clarity that comes not from rage, but from truth. The truth that he never loved me. He loved the version of me he could control. And the version he left in this bed, beaten, alone, abandoned, was no longer useful to him. So he tried to bury her with words. He failed. I opened my eyes, just a sliver, enough to see the outline of the door where he'd exited, enough to breathe through the pain and remind myself that I was still alive, still here, still capable of choosing. And I chose this. I would rise, not with screams, not with accusations, but with silence, precision, planning, the kind of strength he'd never understand. The ceiling above me had a crack, thin like a hairline fracture in bone. I stared at it for hours. It was the only thing in the room that looked more broken than I felt. Every few minutes, the monitor beside my bed let out a soft beep, like a clock ticking down to something I couldn't yet name. Time passed strangely in this place, stretched, smeared, suspended. I stayed still. I let the world believe I was still too weak to move, too fragile to speak. The nurses came and went with polite pity, voices low, footsteps careful. I didn't mind. Let them see what they wanted. Let them whisper about the poor woman in room 408 who survived something awful. They didn't need to know the truth. Not yet. Because in my stillness, something powerful was forming. The pain in my body was real. I wouldn't deny that. Every shift of my torso sent needles through my side, where the seatbelt had bruised bone and torn flesh. My right arm had a hairline fracture. I had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and a lingering headache that pulsed behind my eyes like a second heartbeat. But the pain wasn't my enemy anymore. It was my reminder, my tether to this new self, born in silence. Every breath I took hurt, but I welcomed the ache. It meant I was still here, still capable, still in control of something. I began testing my limits, inch by inch. First, I wiggled my toes beneath the stiff sheets, then my fingers curled slowly around the edge of the blanket. One afternoon, when I was sure no one was watching, I lifted my arm just high enough to reach the call button, then didn't press it. I didn't need help. I needed knowledge. Every motion, no matter how small, was a rebellion against the version of me he believed in. He hadn't come back since that morning. Part of me was glad. The other part was alert, aware that silence from someone like him was never harmless. He was planning something. Or worse, he thought it was over. That I'd stay here, rot quietly, and disappear into the long list of women who gave too much and died too soon. But I wasn't going to die. Not in this bed. Not in this story. There was a window to my right, narrow, caged with cheap wire, but still open to the world beyond. Through it, I could see a tree. Just one, bent slightly from wind, its leaves brittle from the August heat. Still it stood. Still, it lived. So would I. The next nurse who came in, Angela, her name tag read, was young, tired-looking, but kind. She adjusted my IV and smiled. I held her gaze for a second longer than usual. Just enough. Not too much. She smiled again, hesitated, and then said, "You're healing well. You've been through a lot." I didn't respond with words. I blinked slowly, carefully, like someone too weak to speak. It was a performance, yes, but not a lie. I was healing, just not the way they thought. I watched her movements, memorized the routine, when she flushed the IV line, when she checked the vitals, when she updated the chart, how often she looked at the clock, how she left the door slightly ajar when she left. I was gathering, observing, not just the staff, but myself. I began asking questions in my head. How many steps to the hallway? How often did the night shift check in? What time did the medicine make me drowsy? I wasn't ready to move yet, but I would be. Because strength wasn't loud. It didn't come with clenched fists or raised voices. Strength, I was learning, could look exactly like surrender, and that's what he would never see coming. I began to use my weakness as a weapon. The bruises, the limp, the unfocused stare, those became my armor. Each sigh, each delayed response, each glance down to the floor when someone asked how I was feeling, all intentional. I wore fragility like a costume, and it fit perfectly. No one questioned it. No one suspected that behind the fatigue in my eyes was a sharpened resolve, honing itself day by day. Angela brought me warm water that morning. I thanked her with a whisper so soft she had to lean in. Good. Let them get used to coming closer. Let them lower their guards. While I sipped slowly, my eyes drifted across the room, not randomly, but deliberately. I had already noted the position of the emergency button, the layout of the storage cabinets, the intervals between nurse check-ins. I memorized the schedules, the rhythm of the building. There was order here, and in that order, there were cracks, just like the one on the ceiling. I only had to find the right one to slip through. Later that day, a man in a pressed polo and expensive shoes walked in. Hospital liaison, probably. He asked questions with a gentle voice, scribbled notes on a clipboard, told me I was a fighter. I gave him a small smile, made my voice tremble when I spoke. I don't remember much. I didn't need him to believe me. I needed him to believe the version of me I was offering. He left with a look of pity. Perfect. That afternoon, I heard my name outside the door. 2 nurses talking. They didn't realize the door was cracked. She's lucky to be alive. Husband seemed off, though. Yeah, something about the way he looked at her. Guilt? Maybe. Or maybe something worse. That last sentence lingered like perfume in a closed room. Worse. Yes, there was something worse. But it wasn't just him. It was what I had allowed. All the years of swallowing words, dismissing gut instincts, painting red flags white. I had built the prison myself, brick by brick, trusting that love would be enough to excuse the cold. But now I knew better. I slept lightly that night, but I wasn't resting. I was listening. A soft knock at 11:10 p.m. Angela again. She came in, checked my chart, adjusted my IV. Her eyes lingered on me longer this time. You're quiet, she said. Pain level? I nodded, barely. 7, I murmured. She gave me a shot of something to take the edge off. Dilaudid, maybe. I felt the warmth rush through me, that hazy, pleasant float. I welcomed it, but I didn't surrender to it. I needed to know how it affected my mind. How long until it blurred the edges? How long until it wore off? Information was power, and now even the painkillers were part of my research. When she left, I didn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling again. The crack had grown, or maybe it was just the light. Either way, it felt like a sign. Everything breaks, eventually. Even him. The nights were the hardest. Not because of the pain, but because of the silence. It was in those long, slow hours between the nurse's visits, when the machines hummed softly and the hallway lights dimmed, that my mind became its sharpest. I didn't sleep. I pretended. I lay there with my eyes closed, heartbeat steady, listening for every creak of the building, every footstep outside the door, every shift in the wind rattling the window pane. It was in the dark that I remembered everything he'd tried to erase, the small cruelties disguised as care, the isolation sold as protection, the way he'd convinced me that I was lucky to have him, that no one else would love someone so fragile. I could still hear the way he said it. Fragile. Like I was a cracked ornament he kept on a high shelf. Not out of affection, but to control who could see me. And now here I was. Cracked, yes, but no longer his. I was starting to feel my body return to me, inch by inch. I rotated my ankle under the blanket, flexed my fingers one at a time, breathed deep even when it hurt. Each movement was a victory, a declaration. I was still here, and every second I remained breathing was a threat to his illusion. I began to cry that night, not because I felt sad, but because I needed to know how it would sound, how loud I could be, how long it would take for someone to come. 47 seconds. That's how long after I pressed the call button Angela appeared, flustered, concerned, holding my hand like I was something precious. She stroked my hair, told me I was safe. I thanked her with wide, glassy eyes. She didn't know it, but she had just given me another piece of the puzzle. Response time, emotional leverage, access to compassion. I spent the next day studying Angela's routine. She was my favorite nurse, kind, young, attentive. But more than that, she was honest. She spoke freely around me, believing I was too sedated to catch every word. When she spoke on the phone, I listened. When she updated my chart, I paid attention to her access code. 4 digits. She entered it twice. I memorized it. By noon, I knew her rhythm. By nightfall, I knew when she'd be distracted. I didn't want to use her, but I might need to. Not against her. Never. She was a good person, but good people could be openings too. I wouldn't hurt her. I'd just slip through a door she left open. The ache in my ribs was becoming manageable. The painkillers had dulled the edges of my body, but sharpened my focus. I no longer floated. I calculated. Every beep, every whisper, every sigh was part of the environment I was slowly bending to my will. He still hadn't returned. And that silence, it wasn't peace. It was a storm waiting behind the door, and I would be ready for it. The next morning, the sun filtered weakly through the narrow hospital window, casting a pale line across my blanket. I stared at it for a long time, that sliver of light, and imagined it as a blade, thin, steady, cutting through the dimness. I wasn't religious, but in that moment it felt like something sacred, proof that light could still reach me, even here, even now. The nurse who came in was not Angela this time, but a man, quiet, older, eyes kind. He checked my vitals in silence. I didn't speak. I let him assume I was too tired, too sedated. I watched the way his hands moved, the way he logged data on the tablet by my bed. Code 78A for respiratory, code 51B for neurological. I filed them away, every bit of it. Information wasn't just power anymore. It was revenge, dressed in patience. He left with a polite nod, not realizing I'd just memorized his login pattern. 6 digits, repeated twice. I didn't know what I could do with it yet, but it was something. And something was everything when you were rebuilding from nothing. I drifted back into a light doze. Not sleep, never real sleep, but enough to let my body recharge. When I opened my eyes again, the door was open, and he was standing there, my husband. He didn't walk in right away. He stood in the doorway as if deciding whether to enter a chapel or a crime scene. He looked at me like he didn't recognize what he saw. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he was still searching for the woman he thought he owned. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I kept my face neutral, passive, still wrapped in the mask I'd so carefully constructed. He stepped inside, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. Not out of fear, out of calculation. "I've been busy," he said, as if that explained his absence. As if a week of silence was justifiable because he had phone calls and meetings. I said nothing. He looked uncomfortable. Good. I didn't mean what I said before, he added, tone low, eyes darting toward the hallway. Still, I said nothing. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle it. I watched him, blinking slowly, letting the silence stretch. He shifted in place, hands in his pockets. "I brought you something." He reached into his coat and pulled out a book. A journal, actually. Leather-bound. Too new. He placed it on the table beside my bed like it was a peace offering. "For your thoughts," he said. If he knew how many thoughts I had already written, in my mind, on the walls of this room, in the quiet screams I'd swallowed, he wouldn't have dared offer that. He sat in the chair. I could smell his cologne, the same one he always wore. Sharp, artificial, a scent that used to comfort me. Now it made my stomach turn. "I just want to make things right," he said. That's when I looked at him. Really looked. And I saw it. The faint crack in his composure. A flicker of unease behind his eyes. He wasn't here out of love. He was here because he sensed the shift. Because something in him recognized that control was slipping. And he was right. It was. I didn't touch the journal he left. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need it. My thoughts didn't belong in something he could read, something he could find. My thoughts lived in movement, in the space between pain and clarity. in the way I kept my breathing calm, my face blank, my eyes just a little too tired to challenge. He watched me as if waiting for something, for gratitude, for forgiveness, for weakness, but I gave him nothing. That's when my phone buzzed. It was the first time it had moved in days. It had been locked in the drawer beside my bed, supposedly for my recovery, but now it was in reach. He must have brought it back, hoping it would calm me, pacify me. I glanced at it, and then slowly turned my eyes back to him. He gave a tight smile, like a man who had done something generous and expected applause. I waited until he left the room to look at the screen. One message, from a number I hadn't seen in years. It was her, Laura, my best friend from before him. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. He made sure of that. Little by little, he'd poisoned the friendship. She was too negative, he said, too intrusive. She doesn't understand us. So I let her fade. Or rather, I watched her walk away as I stood silently and let him close every door between us. The message was short. He hasn't changed. If you need me, I'm here. I stared at those words like they were a lifeline, because that's exactly what they were. For the first time in days, I felt something close to warmth. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was a shift. The recognition that someone, somewhere, still saw me, still remembered who I was before I became this shadow of a woman. I didn't reply. Not yet. I couldn't risk it. Not while he might still have access to my phone. Not while I was still inside his world. But I memorized the number. I etched it into my mind like it was a prayer, because soon I would need her. That night, I hid the phone under my pillow. Every sound outside the door made my muscles tense, but I didn't close my eyes. I watched the light under the door fade as the hallway darkened. I could hear distant beeping from the ICU, the occasional squeak of rubber soles, and somewhere, a soft sobbing from another room. This place was full of broken people, but not all of us would stay broken. Some of us were just quiet while we sharpened. He came back the next afternoon, but this time he didn't bring gifts. No fake smiles, no excuses. He looked unsettled, as if something had changed between us and he couldn't quite figure out what. He sat in the chair by the window without saying a word. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could feel the tension thick between us, hanging like smoke after a fire. He waited for me to speak. I didn't. Silence had become my new language, and it terrified him. When he finally opened his mouth, the words came slower. Careful. You've been quiet. I blinked once. That was all. He sighed. I guess I deserved that. Another beat of silence. I could feel his eyes on my face, searching for something. Weakness, anger, maybe forgiveness. I gave him none. That's when his tone shifted. Colder, sharper. You can't just shut me out. After everything. I turned my head slightly, just enough to meet his gaze, and held it. Not long. Just enough to let him see it. The stillness in me wasn't confusion. It was calculation. I've been thinking, he said, about what we do next, about your recovery. His words were wrapped in concern, but the core was control. Always control. I want to bring you home soon, he continued, where you'll be comfortable, with me. There it was. The strategy. He'd realized the hospital was dangerous for him. Too many eyes. Too much distance. Here, he couldn't contain me the way he used to. He couldn't interrupt every conversation, couldn't control what I heard or who I saw. He needed me back in his environment, his rules. I didn't respond. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. We'll get through this. You and me, like always. I wondered how many times he'd said that to me over the years, and how often I believed it. You and me. The phrase that used to mean unity. Now it felt like a warning, a sentence. He stood up, adjusted his collar, then walked toward the door. I'll talk to the doctors. See when we can move you. I let him walk out, and the moment he did, I reached under my pillow and unlocked the phone. No hesitation. I typed just 3 words. I need you. And hit send. The message was sent. Just 3 words, but they felt like a scream in the silence I had lived in for far too long. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, heart thudding, not from fear, but from something more dangerous. Anticipation. I knew Laura. She wouldn't hesitate. She had been waiting for that signal for years, and now it was out in the world. Irretrievable. There was no turning back. I slid the phone back under the pillow, just as the nurse entered. Not Angela. Another one. New face, tired eyes, clipboard in hand. She asked how I was feeling. I said little, enough to keep her from suspecting, enough to blend in. I was no longer interested in comfort. I wanted invisibility. I needed to be forgettable until the exact moment I was unforgettable. After she left, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The pain was there, still pulsing beneath the surface, but it had become familiar, manageable. It was no longer something that owned me. It was something I wore, like armor. Every breath still hurt, but I counted them, steadied them, made them my rhythm. Pain was information, and information was now my most dangerous weapon. I began to think in timelines. How long until Lara responded? How long until he returned? How long until someone made a decision about my discharge? I needed to stay ahead of all of it. I needed to be unpredictable while appearing completely predictable. That was the key. He thought he knew my patterns, thought he had memorized my responses, my limits, my fears. He was going to learn how deeply he'd miscalculated. The next hour stretched. Then 2. No message from Lara. I told myself she was preparing, that silence didn't mean absence. And then, just as the hallway lights dimmed and the night staff rotated in, I felt the buzz again. I didn't pull the phone out immediately. I waited, heartbeat controlled, breath even. Then, slowly, I slid it from beneath the pillow and read the screen. Tell me where. Tell me how. 12 words. But they were everything. I typed carefully, quickly. Gave her the name of the hospital, the room number, and one instruction. Don't come inside. Watch first. Wait. I needed her eyes out there while mine were trapped in here. She responded with a single word. Done. That night, I didn't feel alone. For the first time, there was a presence outside this room that wasn't pretending. Someone who saw me. The real me. Not the weak, broken woman he believed I was. Not the silent, passive patient the nurses saw. But the woman beneath the fractures. The one quietly preparing to burn down the world he built around her. I looked at the ceiling. The crack was still there. And now, I swore it had spread. The next morning, I woke before the first light. The hospital was still, heavy with the weight of unspoken things. My body hurt in familiar ways, but it didn't scare me anymore. The pain had become a signal, confirmation that I was alive, aware, in control. I sat up slowly, breathing through the tension in my ribs, and glanced at the door. Closed. Good. I reached for the phone. No new messages. I didn't need one. Lara had received everything she needed. Now it was my turn to prepare the inside while she handled the outside. Later that day, a nurse I hadn't seen before arrived. Short hair, rushed steps, distracted eyes. She handed me a paper cup with pills, checked the IV line, and barely looked at me. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "What's this one?" I asked, pointing to the small round tablet in the cup. She paused, then glanced at the chart. "Just your pain management dose," she said, already turning away. I didn't press. I swallowed it, or pretended to. As soon as she left, I leaned to the side, coughed gently into a tissue, and dropped the pill inside. I folded it quickly and slid it under the mattress. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but every variable mattered now, even a single pill, especially a single pill. Throughout the afternoon, I began noticing patterns in the staff. The security guard who passed my door every hour like clockwork. The nurse who always left her access card on the cart when she bent to check vitals. The med tech who complained loudly in the hallway about being short-staffed. All of it was data. All of it was potential. Around 3 p.m., the door cracked open. Him. Again. He looked worse this time, less confident. Something in his expression had started to unravel. He glanced at the machines, at me, at the journal still untouched on the table. "You haven't written anything," he said. I blinked. He took a step closer. "You should be writing. Getting it out. That's what they say, right?" I didn't move, didn't react. I just watched him, let him fumble in the silence. "I know I made mistakes," he said, dropping into the chair by my bed. "But I've been here, haven't I? Trying. Still, nothing. Can we stop pretending like I'm the enemy?" There it was. His favorite trick, turning my pain into an accusation against him. I held his gaze for the first time in days. No anger, just clarity. And he blinked first. He muttered something under his breath and stood. He wasn't used to silence. He was used to control, and I was robbing him of it, one breath at a time. When he left, I waited 3 full minutes, then reached under the mattress, unfolded the tissue, and stared at the white pill resting inside. I didn't know what it would be yet. A distraction? A trade? A weapon? Maybe all 3. That night, I stayed awake counting seconds between footsteps. Each sound in the hallway became familiar. The guard at midnight, the cleaning cart at 12:17, the quiet hush of nurses exchanging shifts around 2 a.m. I tracked them all with the precision of someone who no longer had the luxury of time or the patience for fear. Every detail mattered. Every rhythm was part of the pattern I needed to escape him, because that's what this was now. Not recovery. Escape. When the hospital quieted into its deepest silence, I moved. Just slightly. Enough to reach into the drawer where they kept my personal items. The phone was still there, tucked inside a bag with my wallet and keys. But that's not what I wanted. I was searching for something else. Paper. A pen. I found both. Not to write in the journal he left. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. But to start something of my own. A ledger. A log. Every hour, every staff change, every medication. I scribbled in the dark, fingers trembling from the effort. Not fear. I documented the world outside my body so that when the moment came, I wouldn't just be ready, I'd be precise. Sometime before dawn, I hid the paper behind the headboard, folded tightly. Invisible unless you knew where to reach. No one would find it. And if they did, they wouldn't understand what it meant. But I did. It was my map, my blueprint, the start of something he couldn't control. I lay back down, bones aching, but spirit steady. And when I finally closed my eyes, I saw it. Not him, not the accident, but a door, half open, with light pouring through. The next morning began like the others. Routine, sterile, predictable. That predictability was exactly what I had been waiting for. As Angela returned with my medications, I noticed how her hand lingered on the chart longer than usual, her expression a little more guarded. Something had changed. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I watched her movements carefully, my own face still a mask of fatigue. She didn't know what I was doing behind this stillness. She didn't know that I had begun writing again. Not confessions, not journal entries, but instructions. Triggers, notes that only one person would understand. After she left, I reached for the folded paper behind the headboard and added a single line. He is planning to take me home. I circled the word home 3 times. That wasn't a home. It was a cage disguised as comfort. I would not return to it. Not on his terms. Not ever again. Around noon I heard the knock. Soft. Hesitant. I knew it was him before the door opened. He entered without waiting for a response, just like always. He held a paper bag, the kind from the hospital cafe. I brought you soup, he said, as if that erased everything. I turned my face toward the window. He set the bag down. I could feel him watching me, waiting for some kind of reaction. When none came, he sat. I talked to the doctor, he said. They're saying you could be discharged next week. My pulse didn't spike. I didn't move. I kept my breathing slow, controlled. I'll get everything ready at home. You'll have a room just for recovery. Peaceful. Quiet. I almost laughed, but kept it buried. He thought quiet meant control. He didn't understand that quiet was now mine. He stood to leave, frustrated. I didn't stop him, didn't speak. But once the door closed, I reached for the paper again. I wrote another sentence. He's moving faster. I need eyes here. I folded it tightly, slid it back into hiding, then reached for the phone. One message. Just a name. Lara. It was time to bring her in closer. The reply came less than 2 minutes later. I'm already outside. She hadn't waited for permission. Of course not. She never did. Lara had always known when something was wrong, even before I admitted it to myself. I lay there, staring at the screen, my heart beating steady and cold. Not fast, not anxious. Cold like strategy. I typed, I need a distraction tomorrow. Something small. Enough to draw attention. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what I was planning. She only replied, tell me the time. I gave her a window. 2:45 p.m. It wasn't random. That was the time when the shift changed, and Angela usually left her cart outside the room. I needed a moment, a crack in the routine, and Lara was going to give it to me. The next hours passed in silence, but I felt electric beneath the sheets. I began rehearsing every motion in my head. how to reach for the cabinet without sounding the alarm, how to pocket something small and useful without getting caught, how to return to bed and let the room return to its rhythm. That night, I pretended to sleep again. A nurse came in, adjusted my IV, left without a word. I waited, then moved. Slowly, carefully, I reached for the phone again and typed one more message. If something goes wrong, call the number on my ID card. Ask for Dr. Naves. Tell her what you know. That name was the only person inside this hospital I had reason to trust. Not because we were close, but because I had seen her react when my husband spoke during rounds. I saw the way her mouth tensed, the way her questions narrowed. She suspected, maybe not enough to act yet, but enough to believe Lara, if it came to that. I hid the phone again and closed my eyes. Outside, a breeze moved through the trees. Inside, I felt it too. The first shift in the air. Quiet, but irreversible. The next morning, everything felt sharper. I woke early, before the staff rotation, and ran through every movement in my head like choreography. No mistakes, no hesitation. I would have one chance. Around 9:30 a.m., he arrived, earlier than usual. That unsettled me. He walked in carrying coffee and a newspaper, trying to look casual, but his eyes gave him away, darting, evaluating. He was reading me like he always had, but something had changed. I was no longer an open book. I was a sealed vault. "Did you sleep?" he asked. I nodded faintly. Let him think I was slipping back into obedience. Let him relax. "You look better," he added, stepping closer. "There's color in your face." I didn't respond. He leaned in, close enough for me to smell the bitterness of the coffee on his breath. "You've been strong," he whispered, "but don't confuse survival with power." That was it. The tell. He was nervous. He felt it too. He straightened up quickly, as if regretting the words, and turned his attention to the window. I studied the way his hand tapped against his thigh. Insecure, impatient. He left after 10 minutes, saying he had a call to take. As soon as the door shut, I exhaled. Not fear. Focus. 2:45 was coming. I spent the next hours in silence, observing the hall, counting footsteps, tracking every voice that passed my door. Angela came in at 1 p.m., checked vitals, adjusted the drip, smiled. "You're stronger today," she said. I nodded. Let her believe it was recovery, not preparation. At exactly 2:42, the fire alarm chirped once, short and sharp. Not a real alarm, just enough to draw eyes. Down the hall someone shouted. Angela cursed under her breath and stepped out of the room, leaving her cart behind. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I moved like I had rehearsed 100 times. Reached down, opened the bottom drawer, found what I was looking for, an access badge. Temporary, assigned to a med tech named Julio, left too carelessly on the top tray. I slid it under my blanket just as Angela rushed back in. "False trigger," she muttered, annoyed. "Someone probably burned toast in the lounge." I smiled weakly, murmured something about rest. She nodded, reassured. I turned my face toward the window again. Across the street, in the reflection of a parked car, I saw her, Lara, standing at a distance, watching, and I knew this was only the beginning. The badge burned against my skin like a secret. I kept it tucked beneath the blanket, beneath my side, where no nurse would check unless I gave them reason. I didn't. I was careful, measured. That afternoon, I requested a second pillow. When the nurse brought it, I used the moment to slip the badge inside the pillowcase, between the layers of fabric. It was safer there. Less risk of being found during a routine check. No one questions a patient asking for comfort. I leaned into the role. Tired. Healing. Compliant. The perfect image of quiet recovery. But inside, I was pacing, strategizing, waiting for Lara's next move. At 5:17 p.m., the phone vibrated once. A message. A single sentence. "He leaves the hospital at 6:30. I stared at those words and felt a shift in my chest. Not fear, not even excitement. Something colder, calculated. At 6:00, I rang for Angela, asked if she could help me sit up for dinner. She smiled, pleased to see me engaging, and helped me shift into a better position. As she adjusted the bed controls, I asked softly, "Can I get some tea? Something warm?" She nodded, left the room, and I reached under the second pillow, retrieving the badge. I stared at it for a few seconds. It was scratched and bent, but intact. Julio's name, level 2 access, Not enough to leave the building, but enough to open doors between the wings, enough to start exploring. I tucked it into the sleeve of my gown just as Angela returned. She handed me the tea, unaware. I smiled faintly, thanked her, and sipped slowly. I needed her calm, her normal. I needed everything to stay predictable on the surface while the ground beneath us began to shift. He didn't come back that night. That in itself was unusual. I messaged Lara. Change of routine. He left early. She replied instantly. Following him now. Be ready. I lay back, eyes on the ceiling, feeling the weight of that phrase. Be ready. I was. Not for confrontation, not yet, but for movement, for expansion, for control. Every moment I remained in this bed was no longer helplessness. It was positioning. And soon, I'd start walking again. Not for recovery, for recon. The next morning began with an unusual quiet. The hallway outside my door was less chaotic than usual, like the staff was holding its breath. I listened for Angela's footsteps but heard someone else. Heels. Too fast. Too sharp. A different nurse came in, young, distracted, eyes flicking quickly from machine to chart. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't look at me. That meant something had shifted. I waited until she left before reaching for the phone. A message from Lara was already there. He went to a lawyer's office. Spent 42 minutes inside. Left with a folder. No details yet. I stared at that text and felt the pressure in my chest rise. Not panic. Fuel. So he was preparing something. Maybe a move against me. Maybe setting the legal groundwork to make himself look like the victim. The concerned husband. The man who tried to help his fragile wife. I wouldn't let him frame the story. I would write my own. I tapped out a reply. I need to get out of this room. Her answer was fast. What do you need? I paused, thinking. A reason. A path. And a witness. I typed slowly. Send flowers. No card. I'll fake a reaction. Get the staff's attention on me. You watch who shows up, who responds. She understood immediately. On it. 2 hours later, they arrived. Lilies and roses. Expensive. Loud. In a vase that didn't belong. No name attached. Angela brought them in, smiled gently, assumed the best. Someone really cares about you, she said. I didn't answer. I stared at the flowers, then at the doorway, and let my hands shake. Subtle. Enough to draw concern. Angela's eyes narrowed. Do you know who sent these? I shook my head slowly. Let her see the confusion. Let her imagine the worst. She stepped out, probably to speak with the head nurse. That was what I needed. I reached for the badge, slipped it from my pillow. The hallway was clear. I moved. Slow at first. Careful. Just to the doorway. Just to see. My body screamed in protest. But I didn't stop. Across the corridor I saw the elevator. The keypad. The locked doors. All of it within reach if I had the time. Behind me, I heard voices. I turned back. Returned to bed. Hid the badge again. Angela re-entered with another nurse. They were gentle. Worried. Asking questions. You're safe, they said. You don't have to be afraid. I nodded, played the part, but I wasn't afraid. I was measuring the distance. I was timing the response. And outside, I knew Lara was watching, taking note of who came, who lingered, and who didn't. That night, I didn't sleep. My body remained still, but my mind moved through corridors, unlocking doors, tracing steps I hadn't yet taken. The memory of that brief moment outside the room was burned into me, not because of the pain it caused, but because of the clarity it brought. The hospital was a puzzle now, and I had finally seen the edges. I started mapping it out in my mind. From the doorway of my room, left led to the nurse's station, right led to the elevators and the stairwell. At 3 a.m., there was a 20-minute window when the hallway was completely still. No rounds, no check-ins, no food service. That would be the time. The next morning, Angela brought my breakfast. Oatmeal, too sweet, toast, cold. I barely touched it. She looked concerned but didn't press. Good. Let her think I was declining again. Let them all relax into the rhythm of my recovery. I needed to be invisible just a little longer. After she left, I retrieved the badge from the pillow and tucked it into the sleeve again. I began practicing. How to sit up fast without triggering the monitors. How to slide to the edge of the bed without disturbing the IV. I traced the wires with my fingers. Learned how they connected. how much slack I had. I would need to remove them without alerting the system. I had seen Angela do it once when transferring me to a different bed. There was a button to silence the alert. I just had to time it. At 11:47 a.m., the phone buzzed. Lara. She'd gotten a clearer look at the folder he took from the lawyer's office. Divorce, custody, mental instability. He was trying to build a case against me. Frame me as unfit, paranoid, unstable. It would explain everything. My silence, my behavior, even the accident. That was his endgame. Not just control, erasure. He wanted to turn me into a memory that no one questioned. I didn't respond right away. I let the rage settle, then harden. I typed slowly. Not yet. Let him think I'm still weak. Let him prepare his case. I'm preparing mine. That afternoon, I practiced unhooking the IV. Just once. I pressed the silence button on the monitor while slowly removing the needle from my arm. The screen didn't beep. No red alert. I wrapped the site with gauze, tucked the tubing beneath the blanket, and lay back as if nothing had happened. No one came. Perfect. I reinserted the IV carefully. There was pain, but I didn't flinch. That night, I stared at the ceiling and repeated every detail of the plan in my head. Directions, timings, exits. I wasn't running. Not yet. I was preparing for confrontation, and next time he stepped into my room, I'd be ready to look him in the eye and ask the question he'd been avoiding since the day I woke up. Why was I really in that car alone? The question haunted the corners of my mind. Not just why I was alone, but how it had come to that. He'd told the doctors I'd needed space, that I'd stormed out, that I refused help. But that wasn't how I remembered it. The pieces of the night before the accident were fractured, but they weren't lost. I remembered the shouting, the way he stood in the doorway, blocking my path. I remembered the keys in my hand, clenched so tightly my palm ached. I remembered looking over my shoulder and seeing nothing in his face. No worry, no hesitation, just relief. Like I was solving a problem for him by walking out. That morning, a woman was brought into the room across the hall, elderly, frail, wheeled in by 2 nurses. I watched the way they handled her. Soft voices, gentle touch, kindness. Her son arrived 20 minutes later, young, anxious, attentive. He sat beside her for hours, holding her hand, talking even when she slept. The contrast made something tighten in my chest. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that kind of presence, that kind of love without agenda. I turned my face toward the wall, let the ache pass. At 3:05 p.m., I received a message from Lara. He met with someone new today. A woman, brunette, well-dressed, left in separate cars. My stomach twisted. He was moving fast now, setting up the narrative, creating distance from me, rewriting the timeline. I knew what he was doing, presenting the image of a man trying to hold everything together while his unstable wife deteriorated. But I wasn't deteriorating. I was evolving. That evening, I watched as the staff moved through their routines. The janitor with the squeaky cart, the med tech who always hummed a tune, the young nurse who checked the supply closet and left it open for 30 seconds. I memorized it all. These weren't random details anymore. They were pieces of the escape, pieces of the plan. At 6:30 p.m., he walked in. No coffee, no smile. This time he looked annoyed. "You've been ignoring me," he said, as if it were a crime. I looked at him. Just looked. He shifted. "I know this is hard for you, but I'm doing everything I can. I've spoken to your doctors. I'm handling your discharge. I'm protecting your interests." I waited. Let the silence stretch. Then I asked, "Why was I alone?" He froze. "What?" "In the car. Why wasn't anyone with me?" He blinked. "You told them I needed space, but I remember fighting. I remember you telling me to go, to get out." He swallowed, hard. "That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did." The pause that followed was longer than it should have been. He turned away toward the window. "You were emotional. You wouldn't listen. And you let me leave like that. After drinking?" He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. And it was darker than any bruise on my body. He left without answering. No apology, no denial, just silence. The kind of silence that confirms everything. I stared at the closed door for a long time after he was gone, my jaw tight, breath shallow. I had asked the question, and now I had the answer, even without his words. He had wanted me out of the house that night. He had pushed me toward that car, knowing I wasn't stable, knowing I was angry, raw, unfit to drive, and he had let it happen. Or worse, counted on it. It wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. At 7:15 p.m., I sent a message to Lara. He slipped. He didn't deny it. I watched the typing dots appear, disappear, then come back. Her reply was fast. You want to confront him fully? Or finish building the trap? I closed my eyes for a moment, breathed in the weight of that decision. Then I typed, both. I need one more night. Then we move. That night, I began preparing everything. I rewrote the full timeline of events as I remembered them. From the argument to the crash to the first words I heard in the hospital, I included names, times, phrases, witnesses. I documented the manipulation, the patterns, the lies. I hid the pages beneath the mattress, wrapped in a sterile glove. It wasn't just a record. It was evidence. I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I was going to make him explain everything, publicly, irreversibly. The next morning I asked Angela for a favor. I need to speak to a social worker, I said softly. She looked at me with concern. Are you okay? I need to make sure my discharge is safe, that someone's not pushing it before I'm ready. She nodded immediately, her eyes narrowing. I'll make the call. I had planted the seed. Now the process would begin. Checks, questions, delays, paperwork, time, exactly what I needed. At 11 a.m., a delivery arrived at the nurse's station. A small envelope. No return name. Angela brought it to me with curiosity in her face. Someone dropped this off, she said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo. Me, sitting in my hospital bed, and behind me, just outside the window, his car, parked illegally, engine running. Lara had sent it. I flipped the photo over. In her handwriting, one sentence. Tomorrow, he falls. I hid the photo under the mattress with the others, folding it carefully, reverently. It wasn't just an image. It was proof that someone had been watching, that someone saw what he tried to keep hidden, that he wasn't in control anymore. All day, I moved through the routine like a ghost, calm, quiet. I responded when spoken to. I took the pills, some of them. I wrote notes in my hidden ledger, tracked every shift change, every gap in supervision. By now, I knew more about the hospital's rhythm than some of the staff. I knew that at 3:12 p.m., the floor supervisor stepped into the break room. I knew that if you walked slowly, no one would question you. People expected patients to be slow. They expected us to be weak, and I was done fulfilling expectations. At 4:45 p.m., I removed the IV again, silenced the machine, cleaned the site, and wrapped it with fresh gauze before anyone noticed. The wound didn't bleed this time. My body was healing, stronger, ready. I changed into the spare gown I had hidden beneath the bed, a fresh one, not stained with blood or iodine. This version of me looked less broken, and that mattered. I slipped the badge into my gown pocket. One last rehearsal. I walked slowly to the hallway, turned right, past the nurse's station, nodded at a janitor who didn't look up. I turned into the alcove where the storage closets were, leaned against the wall, and breathed. Just once, then turned back. Timed the return perfectly. No alarms, no questions. That night, I messaged Lara. Tomorrow, noon. Be ready. She responded instantly. I'll be here. At midnight, the hallway outside my door went quiet. The hum of the machine softened, and the building fell into its vulnerable rhythm. I stared at the ceiling, hands folded over my stomach, and let the calm settle in. Not because I was at peace, because tomorrow, I would no longer be his patient. Tomorrow, I would become his consequence. I woke before the sun. My eyes opened to the same ceiling, the same crack that had widened day by day, as if the building itself had been silently watching me evolve. I moved slowly, testing my strength, every motion deliberate. The pain was still there, dull now, pushed to the edges of my awareness. It wouldn't stop me. Today was not about recovery. Today was reckoning. I removed the IV for the last time, wrapped my arm tightly, and silenced the monitor with practiced ease. I dressed in the spare gown again, combed my hair with my fingers, and studied my reflection in the window. I didn't look like a woman anyone should fear. That was the beauty of it. At 11:45 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway. Not hurried, measured. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands in my lap. Calm, waiting. When the door opened, he entered, wearing a button-down shirt, no tie, holding a small paper bag. "Lunch," he said, lifting it like a peace offering. "I thought you might want something better than hospital food." I didn't move. He placed the bag on the table and sat down, rubbing his hands together. I spoke to the discharge planner. "They said everything looks good. A couple more days and you'll be home." I tilted my head, just slightly. "You mean you're home?" He froze, smile faltering. "Our home." I nodded just once. "Right." His face changed then. Subtle, but I caught it. That flicker of irritation, of discomfort. He didn't like this version of me, the quiet one who wasn't begging, wasn't breaking. "You haven't said much lately," he said. "It's hard to help you when you won't talk to me." I stared at him, expression blank. "You've helped enough." He leaned back in the chair, clearly thrown off balance. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer. At exactly noon, a knock at the door interrupted us. A nurse I hadn't seen before stepped in. "Excuse me. There's a call at the station for Mr. Azevedo." He stood, confused. "Me?" "Yes, sir. They said it's urgent. Legal matter." He looked at me, suspicion rising in his eyes. I said nothing. After a long pause, he walked out. I waited 10 full seconds, then rose, reached under the pillow, pulled out the badge, slid it into my sleeve. Today, I wasn't escaping. I was confronting. I stepped into the hallway without hesitation. No limp, no hesitation. My legs ached, but they held. I walked with purpose, passing the nurse's station, where 2 staff members were turned toward a computer screen, distracted. Just like I had planned. I turned right, heading toward the conference wing, the part of the hospital rarely used on weekends. Empty rooms, quiet corners. No cameras. I found the one Lara and I had chosen. Room 217. The door was unlocked. I entered and closed it softly behind me. The lights were off. Inside, the walls were pale blue, the window large, the table in the center cleared of anything official. Just chairs. Just space. She was already there. Lara, standing by the window, arms crossed, phone in hand. We didn't speak at first, just looked at each other, and something passed between us. Recognition. Not just a friendship, but of the woman I used to be, the woman I was reclaiming. "He's in the call," she said quietly. "Your lawyer's contact. She's recording the whole thing." I nodded. "Are you ready?" Lara asked. I walked to the table, pulled the stack of notes from beneath my gown, and set them down. He's not the only one with a case. We waited 7 minutes. Then the door opened. He stepped in, phone still in hand, face twisted in confusion. He wasn't used to being summoned. He was used to being obeyed. "What is this?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eye. "Your ending." And I sat down, opened the folder, and began to read. The first page was a list of dates, arguments, incidents, times he had isolated me, times I had tried to leave, times he had stepped just far enough back to keep his hands clean. I read them aloud, slow and clear. He didn't speak, not at first. He stood by the door, frozen, phone still in hand, eyes darting between me and Lara like this was a dream he hadn't yet woken from. I turned to the second page, the night of the accident, the threats, the silence. The moment he tossed the keys on the table and walked away. "You told them I left in a panic," I said, voice even. "But I remember the way you looked at me. You didn't try to stop me. You let me drive." He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "I'm not finished." And the third page was a record of his visits to the lawyer. The folder, the witness, the woman he met 3 times in 1 week. "You've been preparing a story," I said, "claiming I'm unstable, laying the groundwork to erase me. You thought you were 10 steps ahead." He laughed then, short, dry, desperate. "You're sick. You've always been paranoid." "No," I said calmly. "I was exhausted, controlled, cut off, but not anymore." He stepped forward, suddenly bold. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? You're just a broken woman in a hospital bed." Lara stepped forward. "She's not broken, and she's not alone." He turned sharply. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm the part of her life you couldn't erase," she said. "And I've recorded every word of this conversation." He froze again. The weight of those words landed heavy. "You won't get away with this," he said. "You'll regret this." "No," I whispered. "I regret waiting this long." He looked at the door as if calculating how fast he could leave, but there was nowhere to run. The story he thought he was writing was over, and mine was just beginning. He stepped back, one hand still clutching his phone, the other curled into a slow, trembling fist. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if he wanted to say something. An excuse, a denial, anything, but couldn't find the right lie fast enough. I stood, not quickly, not to intimidate, just enough to show him that the woman he'd called weak was now standing on her own. "I know everything," I said. "The manipulation, the staged care, the papers you're preparing, the woman you're already building a future with." His eyes flickered. That was confirmation enough. I walked closer, one step at a time. "You counted on me never healing, on the silence that kept you safe. But you forgot one thing. Pain doesn't make you invincible. It makes you precise." Lara slid a document across the table toward him. Copies of messages, timestamps, photos. "Your lawyer will be receiving this," she said. "And so will hers." He picked it up with shaking hands, scanned it too quickly to process the depth of what we'd built. "You can't do this," he said, voice low, almost childlike. "You don't get to rewrite what happened." I stared at him. "I'm not rewriting. I'm remembering." Out loud, his voice cracked. "You said you loved me." "I did," I answered. "But that woman doesn't exist anymore. You buried her under years of guilt and control. I found what was left, and I rebuilt her." He looked down. For the first time since the accident, he had nothing to say, just silence. And in that silence, I finally heard something honest. Fear. Real fear. Not for my well-being, but for the empire of lies he had constructed so carefully, now collapsing with the quiet turn of every page. The room felt smaller now, not because I was cornered, but because he was. The walls that once closed in around me now pressed against him. He stood there, folder in hand, gaze fixed on nothing. I saw it in his posture. He was calculating escape routes, not physical ones, reputational, legal, strategic, but the door had already closed behind him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Everything he had done was laid out in my silence, in the timing, in the way I had chosen this exact moment to unravel him. He looked up finally, as if trying one last time to appeal to some old thread of emotion between us. "You think this will end well for you?" he asked, voice low and hollow. "You really think people will side with you? A woman fresh out of a hospital bed?" I didn't flinch. "I don't need sides. I only need the truth. And you've already given me that. More than once." Lara stepped closer. "Not for me, but for him. You said she was weak. You said she'd never fight back. Maybe that's your problem. You don't know what a strong woman looks like until she's already torn your story apart." He laughed again. Short, bitter, empty. "This won't stick. You don't have proof." I tilted my head. "I have everything you never thought I was smart enough to collect. I have timelines, medical logs, witnesses. And now, I have your voice." He moved to speak again, but something inside him hesitated. He knew. Maybe not the full scale of what we had built, but enough to recognize that his game was over. He backed away slowly, eyes scanning the table, the papers, the calm faces that wouldn't crack under his intimidation. His voice broke for real this time. "You don't know what you're starting." I took a breath, straightened my spine, and said, "No, I know exactly what I'm finishing." He left the room without another word. No final threat, no parting shot, just the sound of his footsteps retreating down the hallway like something hollow collapsing in on itself. I stood still for a long time after he disappeared, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle across my shoulders, not as a burden, but as confirmation. He had nothing left to say, because I had taken back the one thing he feared most: control. Lara placed a hand on my shoulder, firm, steady. "It's done," she said quietly. "For him, yes," I replied, "but not for me." We spent the next 20 minutes organizing the documents, creating copies, sending encrypted files to the lawyer who had been listening from the start. Every word he'd said, every admission, every crack in his performance, it was all recorded. There would be no more gaslighting, no more alternate versions. The truth was no longer a fragile memory in my head. It was evidence, and it had witnesses. Angela found me an hour later. She looked shaken, as if something had shifted without her knowing. "They told me he's no longer listed as your emergency contact," she said. "Someone from administration flagged it. Are you okay?" I looked her in the eye and nodded. "I'm safe." She didn't ask more, She didn't need to. Some people recognize survival when they see it, and Angela had watched mine unfold inch by inch. "If there's anything I can do," she said gently. "There is," I replied. "I need someone to walk me outside tomorrow." She blinked. "You're leaving?" "Not yet," I said, "but I'm done staying hidden." That night, I didn't pretend to sleep. I sat up in bed, window open, letting the August air wash over me. Across the street, I saw Lara's car still parked in the shadows. She wasn't just watching out for me now. She was watching the world realize what I had become. And this time, when I looked up at the ceiling, the crack was gone. Or maybe, finally, I had stopped seeing it. The next morning, I dressed myself for the first time since the accident. No assistance. No slow, shaky hands fumbling with fabric. I moved deliberately, every motion a refusal to return to who I had been under his control. The hospital gown was gone. In its place, soft cotton pants, a long-sleeved shirt Lara had brought in silence, folded neatly on the chair beside my bed. There was no ceremony, just action, just the quiet truth of movement. Angela arrived a few minutes later with a wheelchair. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. "I don't need the chair," I added. Then she paused. "I know, but let's do this by the book, until you walk out of here for real." I allowed it, not because I needed support, but because I knew optics mattered. Let the staff see the same quiet, compliant woman. Let them believe the exit was calm. It wasn't deception. It was strategy. We moved down the hallway, past patients, past nurses, past the ghosts of every day I had survived here pretending to be fragile. As we reached the elevator, Angela leaned closer. "That man came back last night. They told him he wasn't allowed in anymore. He didn't argue, he just left." I nodded, eyes forward. "He knows it's over." She pressed the elevator button. "He doesn't know how lucky he is." I looked at her. "No, he's not lucky. He's finished." We rode in silence to the first floor. The doors opened. Lara was already there, waiting near the glass entrance, her arms crossed, face unreadable. She walked toward us, slow and certain, and I stood before she could reach the chair. Angela watched me rise, but didn't stop me. I turned to her. "Thank you for seeing me." She nodded just once. Then Lara and I walked out together. No words, no dramatics, just two women, side by side, stepping into a day that no longer belonged to him. The sun hit my skin like something holy. It wasn't warm. It was searing. A light that didn't ask for permission. That's what freedom felt like. Not gentle, not soft, but undeniable. We walked across the parking lot without looking back. Lara opened the passenger door for me, but I paused before getting in. I turned slowly, scanning the glass facade of the hospital. Somewhere behind those windows he was probably watching. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was already trying to erase this moment. Rebuild a story where he wasn't the villain, where I was the unstable one who imagined it all. But this wasn't imagination. This was justice. I climbed into the car. Lara started the engine. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. We didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. At a red light, she finally looked over. "Where to?" I thought for a moment. "Home, but not the old one. Somewhere new." She nodded. Already planned for that. Of course she had. She was always 2 steps ahead, just like I had learned to be. When we pulled into the driveway of a small, quiet apartment complex, I felt something strange. Not peace, not relief. Something better. Ownership. This was mine. The pain, the rise, the escape. All of it mine. Inside there was a folder waiting on the kitchen table. Documents, timelines, copies of everything we'd prepared. The case was ready. He'd be contacted within days. His name would face scrutiny, his words dissected, his version of the truth exposed under a light even he couldn't dim. But that wasn't my focus now. Not anymore. My story wasn't about him. It had never really been. It was about what happened after, and I was just getting started. The news broke 3 days later, quietly at first. A legal inquiry into a prominent businessman's personal affairs. Allegations of coercion. A sealed report citing psychological manipulation, medical interference, and a witness account from inside the hospital. No names at first, but people knew. Those who had seen us together. Those who had watched him parade his concern while tightening invisible chains. The image of the devoted husband began to crumble, one headline at a time. I didn't celebrate. I observed. From the window of my new apartment, I watched the light change hour by hour, letting the silence wrap around me. Not as a cage, but as a choice. I had lived too long under noise, under pressure, under him. This was different. This was mine. Lara came by every evening. She brought groceries, updates, wine we barely touched. Mostly, she brought presents, not the kind that hovered, the kind that steadied. One night, she placed a small envelope on the table. "It's official," she said. "They've frozen his assets. The investigation is public. He's hired a PR firm." I nodded. She leaned back, folding her arms. "He'll try to spin it." "Let him," I replied. "Let him talk. I don't need to. I already won." She smiled, slow and proud, then stood to leave. At the door, she turned. "You know, some people won't believe you, no matter how much proof you have." "I know," I said. "That's why I don't need them to believe. I just need them to watch." And they would. Because now, every time he spoke, every time he denied, someone would ask, what if she was telling the truth? And once that question exists, it never leaves. It festers. It echoes. It grows. Just like I did. The official discharge paperwork arrived in the mail 2 weeks after I left the hospital. I read it alone, seated at the same table where we had once spread out evidence like weapons. The form was cold, bureaucratic, dates, codes, doctor's notes. But between the lines, I saw something else. The quiet record of a woman who had entered a ward in pieces and walked out rebuilt. I filed the papers away, not as a reminder of pain, but as a certificate of war survived. That night, I cooked for myself. Small things. Simple. Garlic, olive oil, rice simmering on the stove. The scent filled the apartment like something sacred. I sat down at the table and ate alone. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel lonely. I felt whole. The phone buzzed twice. Messages from people I hadn't heard from in months. Not apologies. Curiosity. That was always the first phase. Then came the shifting. The quiet withdrawals from his side. The slow reintroduction of my name into conversations. They didn't say it outright. They never do. But I saw it in their tone. They were recalibrating. Because no one wants to be on the wrong side of a narrative that won't die. And mine was just beginning to breathe. Later that night, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city moved below. Cars, conversations, windows glowing with lives I no longer envied. I didn't want their version of peace. I had something better. Proof that I had walked through fire, not to escape it, but to learn how to carry it with me. Quietly, powerfully, permanently. Behind me, the folder on the table remained untouched. The case would continue. The lawyers would handle what needed handling. But I had already done the hard part. I had survived. And he would never be able to say otherwise again. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Not out of anxiety, not from nightmares, but because I was ready. The air in the apartment was still, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I stood in front of the mirror, running my fingers through my hair, tracing the fading marks on my arms, the slight shadow beneath my ribs where bruises had once bloomed. My body still remembered everything, but now it remembered strength too. I got dressed in silence, jeans, sneakers, a black sweater, clothes that didn't ask for attention, clothes meant for movement. Outside, the city was just beginning to stretch awake. I walked slowly down the street, past people on their way to nowhere in particular. No one looked twice at me, and that was the power I carried now. Invisibility when I wanted it, presence when I chose it. I reached the small cafe near the courthouse. Lara was already there, 2 coffees on the table, one hand scrolling through her phone, the other holding a file. She looked up and smiled as I approached. "They've set the first hearing," she said. "His team's asking for delays." I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "Of course they are. They're scared," she said. "They should be," I answered. She slid the file across the table. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. What mattered now wasn't on paper. It was in my spine, in my voice, in the fact that I was sitting in the daylight, speaking my name out loud without fear. We drank coffee slowly, without rush. When she left, I sat for a while alone, watching people pass by, none of them knowing the war I had walked through to sit there in that peace. And that was the beauty of it. They didn't have to know, but he did. Weeks passed. Headlines faded. Statements were made, then forgotten. His name still floated through conversations, but it no longer carried certainty. It carried doubt. That was all I had ever needed. Doubt was a seed, and I had planted it everywhere he had once planted control. I didn't chase justice anymore. I became it, quietly, precisely. My days were slow now, filled with simple decisions that were mine again. What to eat, where to go, who to be. There was no grand victory parade, just freedom in small doses. I began to walk more, farther each time, through neighborhoods I didn't know, into bookstores, cafes, parks. I smiled at strangers. I laughed at nothing, and every time I saw my own reflection, I didn't search for bruises or cracks. I looked for something else. Power. Not the kind that comes from revenge. The kind that comes from surviving someone who tried to make you forget who you are. One evening, I sat alone at a bench while the sun went down, orange and gold stretching across the sky like something reborn. A man sat at the other end. He didn't look at me. He didn't try to speak. And I felt no fear. That, I realized, was the full circle. Not just escaping danger, but reclaiming peace. Not just standing again, but walking forward without flinching. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from the lawyer. 3 words. He withdrew everything. No countersuit. No public denial. No final performance. Just silence. I closed my eyes. And this time, the quiet was mine.